It was Christmas morning. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but frost covered the lawns, and wreaths hung neatly on every identical front door in the development. At 8:12 a.m., a moving truck pulled up. Not to a house being sold. Not to a family upgrading. To the smallest home on the corner lot, the one with the faded American flag mounted beside the garage. That house belonged to Mr. William Carter. 90 years old. Korean War veteran. Purple Heart recipient. He had lived in that house for 26 years. Long before the HOA became aggressive. Long before the current president took office. He wasn't loud. Wasn't political. Didn't attend meetings. He just kept his lawn trimmed, waved at neighbors, and every December, without fail, hung a single strand of warm white Christmas lights along the roofline. Nothing flashy. Just steady. That morning, the lights were still on. And taped to his front door was a bright orange notice. Final enforcement removal, non-compliance with HOA standards. I walked over when I saw the truck. 2 men were loading boxes. Mr. Carter sat on a folding chair near the curb, coat buttoned up to his chin, hands resting on a cane. He looked smaller than usual. "Morning," I said gently. He nodded once. "They said I had until today," he replied quietly. "Until Christmas?" He didn't answer. I already knew. The dispute had started months earlier. It was about his flagpole. Not the small one by the garage. A taller one in the front yard. He had replaced the original wooden pole with a sturdier steel mount after a storm cracked it. The HOA president claimed the new pole violated visual harmony guidelines. She sent violation notices. He responded with documentation citing federal protections for veterans' display of the American flag. She escalated. Fines began accumulating. $50 per day. Then $100. Then administrative processing fees. By November, they claimed he owed over $3,000 in unpaid penalties. He lived on a fixed income. He refused to take the flag down. She refused to waive the fines. In early December, a lien was filed. And on December 23rd, an enforcement order was issued for possession recovery due to covenant breach. Possession recovery. For flagpole. On Christmas morning, the HOA president arrived in a dark SUV. Perfect coat. Perfect hair. Clipboard in hand. She stepped out and surveyed the scene like it was a scheduled inspection. I walked toward her. "You could wait until after the holidays?" I asked. "Deadlines are deadlines," she replied calmly. The board voted. I knew that tone. Cold. Procedural. Detached. He's 90. And the covenants apply equally to everyone. Equal. That word sounded hollow in the cold air. She gestured toward the movers. "They're authorized to remove personal property. The home will be secured pending compliance resolution." "Where is he supposed to go?" I asked. She glanced at Mr. Carter sitting quietly on the curb. "I'm not responsible for relocation planning." That's when something inside me shifted. Because this wasn't about landscaping. It wasn't about uniformity. It was about power. And power, when applied without humanity, leaves a mark. A few neighbors had gathered by then. Whispers spread quickly. Phones came out. Photos were taken. The flag still waved above the house. Steel pole standing firm. Unapologetic. At 9:03 a.m., one of the movers approached Mr. Carter gently. "Sir, we need to finish up."
He tried to stand.
His hands trembled slightly as he leaned on the cane. I stepped forward and helped him steady himself. And that's when I saw it. In his coat pocket, folded carefully, was a small velvet case. He opened it briefly as if checking something. Inside were his service medals. He closed it again, without saying a word. The HOA president turned to leave once the locks were changed. But before she got into her SUV, she said something that would later echo in a courtroom. He had months to comply. Months. Over a flagpole. On Christmas Day. She drove away. The moving truck pulled off 10 minutes later. And Mr. Carter stood on the sidewalk in front of a house he no longer had access to. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that 3 different neighbors had already contacted attorneys. And one of them specialized in federal housing protection and veterans' rights. Because enforcing HOA covenants is one thing, but evicting a 90-year-old decorated veteran on Christmas morning? That's something judges remember. And this story was just getting started. By the time I got to the rehab facility, the pain from surgery had dulled into a constant ache, but nothing compared to the pit in my stomach. The call from my neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, replayed in my head. "They put his furniture on the lawn," she'd whispered. On Christmas morning. I couldn't process it. 90 years old. A Purple Heart recipient. 40 years in the same home. Evicted. By an HOA president who couldn't even wait until the holidays were over. When my grandson, Daniel, wheeled me into the rehab common room later that afternoon, I asked him to open my laptop. "Grandpa," he said carefully, "you just had heart surgery. Let's not." "Daniel," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. I didn't survive Korea, Vietnam, and triple bypass to be bullied in my own country. He nodded, and we started digging. The notice was dated December 10th. Violation: non-compliance with updated aesthetic community standards. Apparently, the HOA board, led by President Linda Carver, had passed new rules about exterior paint color, holiday decorations, and lawn maintenance. My faded flag display? Unapproved permanent fixture. My porch ramp? Structural modification without HOA approval. My overgrown hedges? Visual blight. 40 years, and suddenly, I was a blight. Daniel's jaw tightened. "They gave you 10 days? 10 days, I confirmed, while I was unconscious in ICU. That's when we saw the fine schedule. $250 per day for noncompliance. Then accelerated enforcement action. And finally, forced eviction. But Grandpa, Daniel said slowly, scrolling, "they can't evict you. You own the house." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." He kept reading. Apparently, the HOA had filed a lien for unpaid fines. Then, without waiting for a court judgment, claimed the right to reclaim the property under Community Covenant Enforcement Authority. It sounded official. It wasn't legal. I may be old, but I'm not ignorant. I asked Daniel to call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A veteran. If someone was going to fight this, it would be someone who understood what that house meant. The first attorney we reached was out of town. The second said it would take weeks. The third, a woman named Sarah Whitaker, former JAG officer. She listened quietly while Daniel explained everything. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Hayes, did they ever serve you personally with eviction papers?" "No," I said. "I was sedated in a hospital bed." There was a pause. Then she said 3 words that changed everything. "That's unlawful." By evening, Sarah had already pulled public records. No court order. No judicial foreclosure. No sheriff-supervised eviction. Just a private security company hired by the HOA. They'd changed the locks, removed my belongings, and posted a notice claiming the property was now under community control.
It was theft.
Wrapped in paperwork. But it got worse. Mrs. Alvarez sent photos. My furniture, family heirlooms, medals, framed service photos, had been stacked on the curb. Some of it was already gone. "Neighbors thought it was trash," she said softly over the phone. I tried to stop them. I closed my eyes. My wife's rocking chair. My father's military trunk. My wedding album. 40 years of life. Scattered like debris. And Linda Carver had done it on Christmas morning. Sarah called back the next day. "I've filed an emergency motion," she said. "We're requesting immediate restoration of possession." "How long?" Daniel asked. 48 hours for a hearing. 48 hours. At 90, that feels like a lifetime. But the real shock came that afternoon. Linda Carver had given an interview to a local community newsletter. She called me a chronic violator. Said the HOA had no choice but to protect property values. Property values. As if my flag and wheelchair ramp were destroying the neighborhood. Daniel read it aloud, his voice shaking. "That woman." "Easy," I said quietly. "Anger is easy. Discipline is harder. And I've lived my whole life by discipline." The hearing was set for December 27th. 2 days after Christmas. 2 days after I was thrown out of my own home. Sarah visited me in rehab the night before. She laid the documents on the small hospital table. They overstepped, she said firmly. Multiple violations. Illegal eviction. Trespass. Conversion of property. Conversion? I asked. Taking or disposing of someone's belongings without authority. She looked at me directly. They're in serious trouble. I nodded slowly. But I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about dignity. About the American flag folded in a glass case that had been sitting on my mantel. About my wife's photograph. About the ramp they called an eyesore. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of the surgery pain. Because of something deeper. For 90 years, I believed that if you worked hard, followed the law, and respected your neighbors, you'd be treated the same way. Linda Carver proved otherwise. But she made one mistake. She thought I was too old to fight back. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and old paper. Daniel pushed my wheelchair through the double doors while Sarah walked ahead of us, a leather folder tucked under her arm. She looked calm. I wasn't. Not because I doubted her. Because I knew what this meant. If the judge ruled against me, I wouldn't just lose a house. I'd lose the last place my wife ever lived. Linda Carver was already there. Perfectly styled hair. Crisp red coat. Expression like she was attending a brunch meeting instead of a hearing about illegally evicting a 90-year-old veteran. She didn't look at me at first. Then her eyes flicked down to the wheelchair. And she smiled. That was her second mistake. The HOA had brought their attorney. A young man with expensive glasses and a stack of binders. He avoided eye contact. Good. That meant he'd read the emergency motion. And he knew. When the judge entered, the room shifted. Judge Malcolm Reeves was in his late 60s. Stern eyes. Military posture. Sarah had done her homework. Former National Guard. She leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "We're going to be fine." The HOA attorney began first. He spoke about community standards, contractual covenants, and long-standing violations. He made it sound clinical, necessary, as if they'd been forced into action. Then he said something that made Daniel grip the handles of my chair tighter. The resident failed to respond to multiple notices. Resident. Not homeowner. Not Mr. Hayes. Resident. Like I was renting a room in my own life. Sarah stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she began, "my client was under general anesthesia when the final notice was allegedly served." The judge looked up sharply. Sarah continued. "No court order. No judicial foreclosure. No sheriff's involvement. The HOA hired a private security company to forcibly remove a lawful homeowner from property he has owned for 40 years. The word forcibly echoed. The HOA attorney shifted in his seat. Then Sarah did something I'll never forget. She placed a photograph on the evidence screen. It was me, in uniform, 22 years old, standing in front of a transport plane. "Mr. Hayes served this country for 28 years, she said evenly. "He survived 2 wars. He came home, bought a house, paid his taxes, and lived peacefully in this community for decades." She paused. "And on Christmas morning, while recovering from heart surgery, his belongings were thrown onto the street without lawful authority." The courtroom was silent. Even Linda stopped smiling. The judge leaned forward. "Counsel," he said to the HOA attorney, "do you have a signed court order authorizing eviction?" The attorney swallowed. "No, Your Honor. The association acted under covenant enforcement provisions." "That was not my question," the judge interrupted. "Do you have a court order?" "No, Your Honor." You could feel the air change. Linda shifted in her seat. Her confidence cracked. Sarah pressed forward. "Additionally, Your Honor, multiple items of irreplaceable personal property were lost or taken after being placed on the curb. We have photographic evidence and witness affidavits confirming the HOA supervised removal." She placed another image on the screen. My wife's rocking chair, sitting beside a trash bin. A sticker on it that read, "Removed by HOA." My chest tightened. The judge removed his glasses. He looked directly at Linda. "Miss Carver," he said, "did you authorize this action?" Her voice was steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We were protecting community standards." "By evicting a hospitalized homeowner without judicial process?" She hesitated. That was her third mistake. The judge turned back to Sarah. "What relief are you seeking?" Sarah didn't blink. "Immediate restoration of possession, damages for unlawful eviction and conversion of property, and a temporary injunction preventing further interference." The words felt heavy.
Permanent. Real.
The HOA attorney attempted one last defense. He argued that I had accumulated fines, that I ignored notices, that the HOA charter gave them authority. The judge listened, then asked a simple question. "Even if fines were valid, why did you not seek court enforcement?" Silence. "Because they thought I was weak. Because they thought I wouldn't fight. Because they thought no one would care." Judge Reeves sighed. "Community associations are not above the law," he said firmly. "Self-help eviction without judicial authorization is illegal." He paused. "And particularly egregious under these circumstances."
He looked at me.
Not with pity. With respect. "I am granting immediate restoration of possession," he ruled. "The homeowner is to be reinstated today. Any further interference will result in contempt." Linda's face drained of color. But the judge wasn't finished. "As for damages," he added, "we will schedule a full evidentiary hearing. Based on what I've seen so far, this court is deeply concerned." Deeply concerned. In judge language, that's a warning shot. As Daniel wheeled me out of the courtroom, reporters were already gathering. Word travels fast when an HOA throws a veteran out on Christmas. Linda tried to slip past without being noticed, but cameras caught her. And for the first time, she didn't look powerful. She looked nervous. That afternoon, the locks on my house were changed again. This time legally. Back to me. But as I rolled up the driveway, I saw the damage. Scuff marks on the door. Broken planters. Empty spaces in the living room where memories used to be. Restoration was only the beginning. Because what Linda Carver didn't understand yet was that getting my house back wasn't the end. It was the start of something much bigger. Getting my house back felt good, but stepping inside it felt like walking through a crime scene. Drawers were left open. Closet doors hung crooked. The living room rug had muddy boot prints across it. My wife's china cabinet stood half empty. Restoration of possession, the judge had said. But restoration of dignity? That would take more. Sarah didn't waste time. "The emergency order got you back inside," she explained at my kitchen table the next morning. "Now we go after accountability." Daniel sat across from her, laptop open. "What does that look like?" he asked. Sarah's expression sharpened. "It looks like a civil lawsuit." She laid it out clearly. Wrongful eviction, trespass, conversion of property, emotional distress, and possibly punitive damages. "They didn't just make a mistake," she said. "They acted recklessly. And they did it knowingly." That word mattered. Knowingly. We started documenting everything. Mrs. Alvarez provided time-stamped photos of the eviction crew loading furniture into a rented truck. Another neighbor had doorbell footage showing HOA board members supervising. Linda was there, arms crossed, watching. Then came the inventory. Daniel and I walked room to room. "My father's trunk," I said quietly.
Gone.
"Your grandmother's jewelry box?"
Gone.
"My service medals display case?"
Gone.
Daniel stopped writing for a second. His jaw tightened. "That alone," he muttered. I shook my head. "It's not about the money." But Sarah disagreed. "In court," she said firmly, "it absolutely is." 2 weeks later, we were back in front of Judge Reeves. This time, the courtroom was full. Local news stations had picked up the story. Headlines weren't kind. HOA evicts 90-year-old veteran without court order. Public opinion had shifted. And Linda knew it. She looked smaller this time. Less polished. More defensive. Sarah opened with precision. She played the security footage first. The room watched silently as movers carried my belongings to the curb. Then the clip zoomed in. Linda Carver, pointing toward the rocking chair. Remove that too, she said in the video. There it was.
Clear.
Undeniable. The HOA attorney tried to argue that they believed they had authority under the covenant. Judge Reeves stopped him. Belief does not override statutory law, he said sharply. You cannot bypass due process because it's inconvenient. The attorney fell silent. Then came the financials. Sarah presented a breakdown. Value of lost heirlooms. Property damage. Medical impact from stress complications after surgery. Security costs to prevent further interference. The number climbed. Higher. Higher. Until the courtroom grew quiet. Linda shifted in her seat again. Her fourth mistake had been underestimating how expensive arrogance can be. But Sarah wasn't finished. Your Honor, she said, voice steady. This wasn't merely procedural overreach. It was a calculated act meant to intimidate an elderly homeowner who they assumed would not fight back.
She paused.
The court must send a message. That word again. Message. Linda was called to the stand. Under oath, she tried to defend herself. We were protecting property values. From what? Sarah asked calmly. Silence. A wheelchair ramp? Linda's face reddened. It didn't match community guidelines. And did community guidelines authorize bypassing state eviction law? Another silence. The courtroom air felt heavy. Judge Reeves leaned forward. I have reviewed the evidence, he began. His tone had shifted. Measured. Deliberate. The HOA acted outside its authority. The eviction was unlawful. The disposal and removal of personal property constituted conversion.
He paused.
Furthermore, the timing, Christmas Day, during hospitalization, demonstrates a disturbing lack of judgment. Linda looked down. The ruling came slowly. Compensatory damages for lost and damaged property. Reimbursement of legal fees. Medical stress impact considerations. And then, punitive damages. The number was substantial. High enough that murmurs filled the room. High enough that the HOA's insurance carrier would feel it. High enough that Linda Carver's position as president was suddenly very fragile. But Judge Reeves added one more condition. The court orders the HOA to formally apologize in writing, he said, and to revise enforcement procedures to comply strictly with state law. He looked directly at Linda. Power without restraint is abuse. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. Daniel handled most of it. I only said one thing. I didn't fight for revenge, I told them. I fought because no one should be removed from their home without the law on their side. That clip aired everywhere. And something interesting happened. Other residents started coming forward. Complaints. Stories. Patterns of intimidation. Linda's reign wasn't just cracked. It was collapsing. A week later, she resigned. The board announced a full internal review. New elections were scheduled. And suddenly, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Humbler. As for me, I sat back in my restored living room, looking at the empty space where my father's trunk used to be. Some things don't come back. But justice? Justice had. And the lesson was clear. They thought they were untouchable. They thought age meant weakness. They thought Christmas would bury the story. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. And Linda Carver would be remembered not for protecting property values, but for learning the hard way what the law actually values. Winter faded slowly that year. The snow melted off the sidewalks, the news vans disappeared, and the neighborhood returned to something that looked like normal. But it wasn't the same. Not for me. And not for the HOA. The board elections happened in early spring. For the first time in years, turnout was overwhelming. Neighbors who had never attended a single meeting showed up. Quiet families. Retirees. Young couples. Even Mrs. Alvarez brought homemade cookies and a stack of printed ballots. Linda Carver's name wasn't on the slate. She had resigned for personal reasons. That's what the letter said. But everyone knew the truth. The court ruling hadn't just cost the HOA money. It had cost her control. A new president was elected. A former school principal named Robert Gaines. His first official act? He came to my door. He didn't send a letter. He didn't email. He knocked. Daniel answered, then stepped aside. Mr. Gaines removed his hat when he saw me sitting in the living room. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology on behalf of this community." He handed me an envelope. Inside was the formal apology ordered by the court. But he didn't stop there. "We're rewriting every enforcement policy," he added. "No more shortcuts. No more intimidation." I studied him for a moment. Then I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. The damages were paid within 30 days. The HOA's insurance covered part of it. The rest came from emergency assessments. Ironically, the residents Linda claimed she was protecting ended up footing the bill for her decisions. Funny how that works. Daniel helped me replace what we could. The china cabinet was repaired. The locks upgraded. A new security system installed. But something stayed missing. My father's military trunk was never recovered. Neither was my wife's original wedding album. Insurance checks can replace wood and glass. They can't replace history. One afternoon, about a month after the case closed, I received a small package. No return address. Inside was something wrapped in newspaper. Daniel carefully unwrapped it. It was my folded flag display case. The glass was cracked, but the flag inside was untouched. There was a short handwritten note. "Found this at a yard sale. Thought it belonged with you. Thank you for your service." No name.
Just that.
I held it for a long time. Sometimes justice doesn't just come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from strangers doing the right thing. The story didn't disappear. Local news stations ran follow-ups about HOA overreach. A state representative even referenced the case while proposing stricter oversight laws for community associations. I didn't ask for that attention. But if my fight helped someone else avoid the same fate, then it was worth it. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Daniel wheeled me out onto the porch. The ramp Linda called an eyesore had been freshly painted. It gleamed in the golden light. Children rode bikes down the street. Neighbors waved. And for the first time since Christmas, the house felt like home again. "Grandpa," Daniel said quietly, "were you scared?"
I thought about that.
About the hospital room. About the curbside pile of memories. About the courtroom silence before the judge spoke. "Yes," I admitted. "I was." He looked surprised. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop standing up." I rested my hand on the arm of the chair. They thought I was too old. Too weak. Too tired. I smiled faintly. They forgot something. "What's that?" "I've been fighting my whole life." Linda Carver moved out by summer. Sold her house quietly. No farewell party. No grand send-off. Just a moving truck at dawn. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. The house still creaks the way it always has. The floors still remember every step my wife ever took across them. And every morning, I sit by the window with a cup of coffee, sunlight warming the glass of my restored flag case. I don't think about revenge. I think about responsibility. Power must answer to law. Authority must answer to decency. And no matter your age, you never surrender your right to your own home. They tried to erase me on Christmas morning. Instead, they reminded the entire neighborhood of something simple. Homes aren't controlled by bylaws. They're protected by rights. And those rights don't expire at 90.